Hello my apocalyptic students. Welcome to a second little quick video for you as you kind of get your feet wet into all things apocalyptic. Hopefully you've started the book already. You're probably finding if you started reading it, it can be a little tough sledding, but I think you can do it. But in any case, I wanted to do this video fairly quickly, maybe 15 minutes, to just outline for you some of the most basic fundamental things you have to know about apocalyptic literature. And I think if you know these things, it'll help you as you read the book a little more, and then as we go through all the passages and everything else in the semester, I think this will help you as well. Basically, it's always good to get just a basic fundamental outline of what we're talking about when we talk about apocalyptic literature. So this is what I want to do for this short video. Apocalyptic literature is a specific kind of genre of literature that was very popular among Jews and Christians, both the intertestamental time, roughly 200 BC-ish, to about 200 AD-ish. Okay, so in that 400-year period among Jews and Christians, there was a lot of apocalyptic literature being written. So, and it's a specific genre that has specific characteristics. Okay, so that's the first thing you have to know. The reason why we in the 21st century often freak out when we read stuff like Revelation is we don't have a genre of apocalyptic literature anymore, so therefore it seems really weird to us. And because it seems weird to us, we try to fit it into a category that we think we understand, and that's what gives rise to a lot of end-time prophecy pastors who try to tell you that Saddam Hussein is the beast, or that the Pope is the Antichrist, or something like that. That is not the right way to understand what apocalyptic literature is. And actually, I have an article for later on, maybe when we get closer to Revelation, that I'm going to have you read that kind of delves into that a little more, which is kind of interesting. But what you need to know is what about this specific genre of apocalyptic literature from 200 BC to 200 AD, what were some of the key characteristics? If you were living back then and you saw a work that had these characteristics, you would know what kind of literature it is. So, here we go. Like I said in the previous video, apocalyptic literature grew out of the prophetic literature of the Old Testament. It basically looks at those unfulfilled prophecies of the Old Testament that hadn't come true yet, and it tries to make sense of them by putting off into the future some future ultimate day of the Lord in which everything is going to change overnight. Okay, so that's the first thing you have to know. Apocalyptic literature grows out of the unfulfilled prophecies of Old Testament prophecy to try to understand them in a new way. That's the first thing. Second thing that apocalyptic literature is characteristic of, especially in the intertestamental period, is that they were written in times that were considered times of spiritual dryness. Meaning, especially in the course of Old Testament history, when the Jews came back from the exile, one of the things they were expecting, in addition to having a Messiah again and being the great nation again, they were expecting that God's Spirit would be poured out on them again and they would be reconciled to God. Well, once they got back in the Promised Land and none of that happened, they were kind of sitting and waiting for God to pour out His Spirit on all flesh, to quote something from either Jeremiah and or Joel. So therefore, it was during that time when they were waiting for that a lot of the apocalyptic literature was written. So when you read the apocalyptic literature, it looks forward to a time when God would one day again pour out His Spirit. All right, so that's the second thing. Maybe it's the third thing. I forgot. Can't keep track. The next thing is a lot of the times apocalyptic literature was written during times of persecution, and that's really important because if you consider yourself part of the people of God, whether you're a Jew or a Christian, and you expect God to protect you, but you're getting persecuted, apocalyptic literature is addressing that issue. Why am I being persecuted? If God is in charge of everything, if He's sovereign, why am I suffering evil by these bad people over here? Apocalyptic literature addresses that issue by trying to explain what's really going on in God's larger plan, why you are suffering at the moment, and why you can look forward to one day being vindicated. The next thing you have to realize about most apocalyptic literature is written with pseudonyms, meaning the author of the apocalyptic work, we don't really know that author's name. He takes on the name of an earlier Old Testament figure. So for example, when we do the book of Enoch, the Enoch of the early chapters of Genesis did not write the book of Enoch. Some Jew in the intertestamental period wrote the book of Enoch, and he's writing as the figure of Enoch to try to give weight to what he's writing. And so we get that a lot in this. So when we do 4th Ezra and 2nd Baruch, Ezra and Baruch didn't write those things. They were written by Jews in the early 2nd century with the name of these Old Testament figures to kind of bolster their work. The unique thing about the book of Revelation, though, is that John actually puts his own name in the book of Revelation, and that's quite unique, and we'll get to that when we get to the book of Revelation at the end of the semester. So, they're a specific kind of genre that grows out of the prophetic tradition of the Old Testament. They're written during times of dryness. They're written times of during persecution. They're written with pseudonyms. That's a hard word to say, pseudonymously. The next thing you have to realize, and this kind of ties in with the prophetic stuff of the first point, is where the prophets looked for God's vindication of his people to happen within history. The apocalyptic writers came to view that this current age, this current time in history was so corrupt and so evil that it was beyond saving. And therefore, they looked forward to a time when God would intervene, not within that current history, but at the end of that history, at the end of that age, and just turn the page completely and a whole new creation would happen, okay? So that's another characteristic of apocalyptic literature. They're not looking for God's vindication within history, they're looking for a violent end of that history so that God could start anew, okay? And that is why, as you will find out when we do all the passages and books we do, why so much imagery and language in apocalyptic literature is taken from the creation story of the early chapters of Genesis. Because what they envision is a decreation, destruction of the current age. Therefore, then God can have a recreation. So he's recreating. What better imagery to use other than creation language? So that's one of the things you'll see. So, another thing you have to realize, the unique thing about apocalyptic writers is whereas prophets, the Old Testament prophets, proclaimed their message. You know, they were preachers that, you know, their followers wrote down their prophecies and collected them. The Old Testament prophets were essentially preachers who enacted and spoke with their message. Apocalyptic writers did not preach these things. They wrote them. It's a literary genre. They weren't preaching. They were composing books to try to make sense of some of the Old Testament prophecy. So apocalyptic works are essentially literary works. They weren't preached. Another thing that you probably already know if you know anything about the book of Revelation is apocalyptic literature contains tons and tons and tons of symbolism, imagery, highly symbolic language. I mean, kind of crazy stuff that you can't read as literal descriptions of actual things. They're highly symbolic. And so therefore, when you read the apocalyptic stuff, you have to understand what they're referring to and what they're saying. I'll give you one example. All throughout the Old Testament, various places, and in the New Testament and the intertestamental stuff, whenever something major happens that God intervenes, a lot of the language comes to be like, the sun will not give its light and the moon will turn to blood and there'll be violent earthquakes everywhere. That's metaphorical language to explain that when God acts, it's going to shake things up. It's an earth-shattering moment. We do that all the time in just the way we talk. You know, when Muhammad Ali won the heavyweight championship of the world, it's like, shook up the world. He didn't literally shake up the world. It's his way of saying, I surprised everybody and I shook up the boxing world. But it's still metaphorical language. So, but when the apocalyptic writers use that cosmic upheaval language, it's highly symbolic to try to get to what their message is, but we can't take them as literal descriptions of things that they actually see. But again, that'll be teased out as we go through the actual passages. One other distinctive feature of apocalyptic writing, which is really interesting, and you'll see this very much in the Old Testament stuff like Daniel and Zechariah. In the apocalyptic writing, the writer has this vision, but at the end of this vision that he describes, he says, then something like, then an angel told me to seal up the scroll until the time of the end. All right? So obviously, though, since that's put there, if you're a reader and you are reading this, what message are you getting? That this now is the time of the end. I'm now reading this scroll which had used to be sealed up. The end must be near. And so that's one of the things you see a lot in apocalyptic literature. And again, the unique thing about the book of Revelation is that in the book of Revelation we're told to do not seal it. We need to unseal it now, because one of John's message in the book of Revelation is that an apocalyptic event is happening. Which reminds me, and this is in the book that you're reading, the easiest way to understand what an apocalypse is and what it means. If you've started reading the book, you already know it means an unveiling or uncovering. And one of the things I would always do to illustrate this, and I'll just pick this, hopefully I'm showing on the camera, okay? Let's say this is on a table. And this, I always say, this is what an apocalypse is. You ready? Oh, okay? You know, what's the big deal? It's an unveiling of things. It's a revealing. But here's the key. When I'm revealing something, I'm not telling you something that is far off future. Apocalypses, the purpose of the apocalypses is to reveal something to their audience about what God's plans are in the present that they might not be able to understand or see yet. For example, if you're a Jew or Christian going through persecution and you think, why is God allowing this to happen? The unveiling is, here's the reason why God's allowing this to happen. There's a deeper thing going on that you currently can't see that I'm going to reveal to you about to make sense of your world at that time. So that's one of the important things to realize. When it says that apocalyptic literature is an unveiling, it's not like a Nostradamus type of prediction of the far off 1,000 years into the future. It's really about nuclear warfare kind of thing. It's about revealing God's purposes in that present time that the readers might not have understood. Okay? So all that is to say, that is some of the characteristics of apocalyptic literature that you want to pay attention to. And so when you read the initial book, and he kind of goes into all this stuff, that's kind of like the skeletal explanation of what it is, that hopefully that you'll be able to make more sense of what he's saying. Obviously there's more that we can talk about, but I'll touch upon that in my next video. What I'm going to do is over the next week, probably next week, I will make a little video kind of going over the first 6 chapters in the cookbook that you will have done your work with, and I'll grade them, but then I will take a time to make a video to talk to you about what's significant in the book so you can kind of solidify it in your head. And along with that, a few more background things on what apocalyptic literature is. And I'm going to be mentioning a number of things from this book that's the required book that you don't have to get, but it really is good. But if you don't want to buy it, I'll cover some of this stuff in the next video or two, again, just to give you a better background of what we're dealing with. And it's fascinating. I might even make a kind of a worksheet that you can print off that you can keep. So, okay, hopefully that's going to help. If you've taken notes for this, kind of bullet point, what are the main characteristics of apocalyptic literature? Keep that fresh in your minds, because that's going to affect everything that you read in this course. All right. I will next week, maybe next Thursday or Friday, I'll have another video for you. I'll try to make about one a week to kind of help guide you through the stuff that you're going through, because I think it would help. So apocalyptic literature just by yourself at your desk can get a little daunting. So occasionally making a video that helps you think it through, I think it'll be good. All right, I hope this helps, and I've been looking forward to your initial work. All right, bye.